Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I have a wonderful guest on today, and many of you know him. Even if you don't, you might use this product. I have Doug Wing. Doug Wing has over 40 years experience in manufacturing, operations, sales management, leadership, executive management. He's was the co-owner and vice chairman at the Little Giant Ladder Company. Little Giant Ladder Systems before retiring in 2019. He's a member of the senior management team with his father and brothers who built the Little Giant into a $200 million per year in sales company. And the stories with him and his father, Hal, are just so endearing. He's written 2 books. He's working on his 3rd book. I just recently reread them just to make sure I was ready. Got Giant Success, and that's his dad, Hal Wing, on there. I don't know if you saw any of his infomercials, but that's how the world got to find out about him. And The Giver, inside story. And he even has more stories about that. I actually happen to have number 8 of 100 for when he first got his book. And Cynthia, keep climbing with much love, Doug R. Wing. So without further ado, let me bring in the man of the hour, climbing this ladder, climbing the stairs, and having the best life ever. It's Doug Wing. Woohoo!
How are you, Cynthia? Good to see you again. It's been a while.
I know, it's so fabulous. And I just have to let you know that I am prepared to keep on climbing.
Oh, you've got the safety step. That's so cool.
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. And I have the big tall one too. And I wanted to say hello to someone that just popped on here. Who do we have? We have from the Philippines, Miss Nancy. Good morning, Nancy. I think it's morning there. Do you know Doug, Nancy? Have you read Giant Success?
Yeah, when I was in the Philippines visiting my fiance, who's now my wife, I brought books for Nancy, and so my wife Heidi mailed them to her.
And so, congratulations on your wedding. I have not met this young lady yet. I look forward to it.
Thank you very much. But congratulations to you on your book success too.
Yes, it is so fun. We, Doug and I are friends a long time now, from before the whole pandemic thing. We met at one of Jeffrey Gitomer's masterminds. We've done many of them.
Yeah, I think you went to the book writing.
And we went to that one too. Look at that. And now all of us have written books that attended that.
That's correct. Yeah, in fact, I met Jeffrey many years ago when he was doing training for Little Giant. And I was one of the sales managers there. And so he was doing our training. And then later, I started talking to Jeffrey and told him some of the stories. He never got to meet my dad. And he said, you have to write a book and it's going to be a #1 best-selling book. And I kind of laughed. You know how Jeffrey is, he swore. And he said, hey, listen to me, this is going to happen. And it did.
And I am so proud of you. And it is such a great book. And it's available on Audible. The fun thing about this one is you can actually hear Doug Wing's voice. He read this book for the Audible. And you did good. You did good.
Thank you. That was one of the hardest things I ever did. I think it took me like 2 days in the studio, and you don't realize when you're, speaking with someone, how many like little mouth clicks you have or things like that, where you can kind of make these different noises. And so they had to fix a bunch of things, but it was, for that book, it was worth it. Me telling the stories in my own voice. And then the next book, we used someone else. So.
And the next one continues some of the wonderful stories about Hal Wing and how he gave, and you didn't even know about it at the time.
That's correct. Yeah. So I had a bunch more stories. And I met Mark Victor Hansen up here in Arizona. He lives in Scottsdale and I'm just south of him. And I had dinner with him one night and I told him some stories. And he said right then and there at dinner time, he said, I want to do books with you. And the first book is going to be called The Giver. And he said the same thing that Jeffrey did. He said, this book will be #1 best-selling book. And I kind of laughed again, but he was correct.
And they are wonderful. It is so much fun. We did some masterminds, and maybe Eric will put up a picture that we have some of our stars that were mentors to us besides Jeffrey Gitomer and Jen Gitomer at the time. And we have Ken Waz and Jill Waz. And there's Jamie. Yes.
Yeah, and right next to Jamie is Robbie Cornelius. He was one of the speakers, and he does a lot on social media. You'll see him doing a lot of posting and podcasting and things like that.
And there's me, and there's you, and there's Grace. Hi, Grace. And this was one of the masterminds, which I think that one was in North Carolina.
It was in Charlotte, yeah.
Yeah, and we went to see some of our. Did one in South Carolina. Were you the one in Sarasota, Florida?
Yes, I was. I think that was the first one that I ever did. Was the one there, right there. I thought it was Clearwater. Was that where it was? Maybe it was in Sarasota area, in the beach somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we went and did the writing one where we got like going. Hello, Darlene. We are so excited. So, Doug was born in Germany.
Yes, I was. Yeah. Yeah. So my dad was in the military. That's another thing we have in common. Is your father was also in the military. And hey, Kellen Ann. Oh, I haven't talked to Kellen Ann.
Yeah. Hi, Lynn. Hi, Kellen Ann. Thanks for being on. Wonderful to see you guys. Big hugs. I feel like the family's joining us here.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the people that we're seeing were on Grow Live, also maybe on Grow Live Academy with Ken Walls, if I'm not mistaken, and with Gittimer as well.
And the 959s. Does everyone remember the 959s during COVID? You'd be like, let me get my exercise in so I can go and be on the 959.
Yeah, that was really good during COVID. There was so much negativity, and a lot of people were, of course, locked down. And so I think Jeffrey did a good job during COVID to keep people's spirits up.
And I'm still friends with almost everybody, aren't you?
Yes. Yeah, it was wonderful.
Even Charus reached out. But anyway, we're back to Germany, where you were when you were a youngster.
Mm-hmm.
So you were there. Well, your dad was already there, and that's where he met his wife. And then he came back to the States. Why don't you tell the story?
Yeah, so I was born in Germany, and my father was in the military, and he met my mom over there. And then they moved. Oops.
And your mom, whose family didn't want, what did her father say? Don't marry an American.
Yeah, he said, don't bring home an American, and do not marry a Catholic. And we weren't Catholic, but anyway, everything worked out there. And my mom was able to come over to America. And then my dad was selling insurance for an insurance company in Salt Lake City. And they decided to open up since my dad spoke German and another gentleman spoke German, they decided to open up an office. Also, since my dad was a veteran. And so we moved back to Germany, and my dad began selling insurance, life insurance to GIs. And that is where he saw the first prototype of the Little Giant Ladder. Although he was not interested at the time, his partner, Richard Miner, saw the ladder.
Missed it.
Yeah. There's one of them. But his partner, Richard Miner, saw it and kept bothering my dad. And he's like, hey, Richard, we're selling life insurance. I'm not really interested in ladders. And so finally he talked him into seeing this ladder. And my dad's like, wow, this is incredible. And my dad became friends with a gentleman. His name was Walter Kimmerlin, who was the inventor of that ladder. He was a house painter. And my dad ended up buying containers full of ladders from him, and then eventually doing a licensing deal. And then when the patents ran out, my father engineered the ladders and got his own patents. So it was a really interesting story too, because he was doing very well as a salesman, and it was a real struggle. People don't see all of the hardships that we had, starting a ladder company. I mean, we almost went out of business a couple times, but that was one of the really great things about Hal Wing, is he had this incredible self-belief, not an arrogance, but a self-belief and a self-confidence. And the guy never quit. And we ended up being very successful, but it took a long time. Today people are very impatient, and they want everything right now, but people don't realize that Little Giant has been in business for over 50 years. And so it took a long time to be successful.
Helen Ann uses her Little Giant all the time. I love that. And thank you very much for sharing it, Lynn and Eric and Kellyanne. We appreciate that very, very much. I have a picture of a ladder that it wouldn't be a good one to use from Iceland, if Eric pops that up there. We have everywhere I went, I was so excited when I saw a little giant ladder. But in Iceland, they didn't have one. But I had his book, and it had just come out. So there is a ladder that would not pass Hal Wing's inspection. Tell them about how he got the competition. Right, the ladders being sold were like $19.99, and yours were like $200. Lynn loves her ladder, and yours were like $200. And then someone was trying to sell them cheaper, and you went and Hal went and showed them why you get what your money's going. There's like 5 stories there.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of stories right there and all that. But the one thing that people always say, why were you guys so successful? And one of the reasons why is we had the very best quality. And that was one of the sticklers of Hal Wing. He's like, these ladders are going to have my name on them, and they have to be the very best quality. And so that was the one thing that made us very successful, was that we had a quality product, and also the versatility of the product, and that the innovation that we spent money on was very well spent. But in the beginning, it was hard because that ladder had to be shown at $250 ladder compared to a ladder that you could get in Sears or Lowe's or something. I mean, not Lowe's at the time, but probably Ace Hardware or Sears for $20, $19. And it was a really hard thing. But my dad had to go around, and he found out that he had to go show the ladder to make sales. And so what he would do is he'd go around to people that he knew at their house or to businesses, and if he could get their attention and do a demonstration, then he was very successful. And so what they did was they started going out to home and garden shows, state fairs, trade shows, and those types of things. And they would do a scripted presentation with a sales close. And they would, write orders right then, take people's credit cards, and then ship the ladders to them in 4 to 6 weeks. And that's how Little Giant started. We were just doing trade shows. We had no real interest in doing any retail sales until we had a distributor from California that came up and said to my dad at a show, he said, I'd like to buy, I think it was 300 or 400 of these ladders. I want to resell them. My dad says, we don't have a resale program. And he goes, well, I need a price. And so that's how we started reselling them. Is this Brad Becknell from Sunset Ladder placed an order for 300 or 400 of them. And then, we started having a resale part of the company. And then it grew from there. And, lots of ups and downs along the way. And like I told you before, there were several times that we almost lost the business. It was pretty touch and go. But one thing about my dad was there were a lot of people that panicked during those times. But I never, ever saw my dad get nervous or get scared. He showed no fear. And he was just a true competitor in anything that he did. And I think that was one of the things about him, was just that he didn't quit, and he had just this unbelievable confidence and a work ethic that was incredible. And those are some of the things that I learned from my dad was, don't give up. And he would say, the harder I work, the luckier I get. Don't lie, don't steal, don't be lazy, those types of things. And those things were just ingrained in us and served us really well as we worked up in the company. And that's one thing that was really good about my dad too, is, man, we started at the very bottom. He was so smart. We started cleaning, bathrooms and sweeping parking lots and cleaning, machinery and things. And then we would slowly work up and build ladders. And eventually, as we got older, we worked into customer service and shipping, and we learned every part of the business. And he was so wise. And then when we were older, we knew everything in the business, and we were able to take it over instead of just, giving us a corner office and we sat around and did nothing. He was really a smart guy, and we had to earn it. I mean, there were no freebies with Hal Wing.
Well, he did a lot of good stuff, and you found out more about how good he was and what he did for the community anonymously recently when you start working on your first book, and went out and interviewed like 200 people. Is that what it was? Like all this stuff you didn't know that he was doing behind the scenes, just helping everyone and just going beyond the call of duty and just being an amazing person.
Yeah, it was, I interviewed several people for that first book, and as I went around, they would say, hey, I have this story about your dad. You want to hear it? And I was like, I've never heard of these stories before. And so that's one thing that I loved about my dad and his giving, is they were all done in secret, right? He didn't go around and say, look what I've done. I've given this and I've given that. He wasn't one of those guys that, said, hey, put my name on this building or whatever so people can see it. But as I did these interviews, I found out these incredible stories of a man that I think I know my dad went around every day and looked for people that he could help. And so he had his eyes open as it would go around and he would see things, or he would hear, hey, this person lost their job, or they're going through cancer or whatever. And he was always there when people needed him. And he was just incredible that way.
And knowing what was going on with his employees and going through the back door into the offices and saying hello to everybody, and knowing when someone had an injury and going to the hospital to see them and taking care of them and their bills and other stuff you didn't even know about. Pick out one of your favorite ones of those. There's so many.
Well, that's one thing. You bring up a good point. You know, most business owners go through the front door and try to avoid as many people as they can, go in their office and close the door. I know some of those people, but my dad would go through. Yeah, he would go through the back door. He knew every person. We had over 400 employees, and he knew, not only did he know their name, but he knew something about them. And so, man, just some incredible stories. Like, we had a guy named Mel that a canal broke by his house and it flooded his basement. He had mold in his house, and there was a battle between the canal company and the irrigation company and the people that built the canal. And they were trying to avoid taking care of him. And this Mel was telling me this story. He said, I don't know how your dad knew about this, but he said, I was walking through the office one day and I was down. I was trying to pay all these lawyers and get my house fixed up. And he said, your dad stopped me and asked me how things were going. And I said, man, Hal, it's really tough. I'm trying to fight these lawyers and trying to get my house fixed, and nobody wants to take responsibility. And he says, your dad pulled a check out of his pocket that was already made out to me for $10,000.
Wow.
Personal check.
Already made out?
Yeah, it had already been filled out. And so I'm thinking, how did my dad know that day, right, that Mel was down? And he'd already written the check to him. And so he had this really, I don't know, he just had intuition. And he knew, his people really well. And so with that money, Mel said, hey, I was able to help, pay for my legal fees. And we ended up getting our house fixed and everything. But he goes, man, your dad just knew that day that I was down, and he had the check ready and handed it to me. And he was, we had another employee that his wife had a stroke, and my dad walked into his office and said, your job is secure. I don't care how long it takes. I want you to go home and take care of your wife. They had young kids. And he said, I will pay you every 2 weeks for being home with your wife. And when you get her better, you come back, your job will still be there. This went on for like close to a year, I think. And my dad paid him his full salary. And so, when you have somebody who's your boss who treats you like that, these people would bend over backwards for my dad. They knew. There was a guy that worked for us. His name was Jerry Jessen, and he retired from our company. And he said, think about this, everybody out there in the audience today, and you, Cynthia, because I know you've worked in a lot of business. But he said, I knew your dad loved me so much that he goes, I didn't want to disappoint him. And that made me work even that much harder for him because I knew he loved and cared about me. Now, how many bosses have you had that you think, oh, this guy loves me, he cares about me and my family? Not very many.
Not very many. I can count them on 2 fingers.
So, and that was one of the things that really the Giant Success book. I think the meat of that book is Hal Wing had the philosophy of Zig Ziglar, where Zig Ziglar said, if you help enough other people get what they want, you will have everything that you want. And so there's a little plaque on the building at Little Giant that says, if you concentrate on building the business and not the man, you will not achieve. But if you build the man, you achieve both. And so Hal Wing, I always tell people, Hal Wing didn't build ladders, he built people. And then those people built the ladders for him. And so my dad was really a people guy. He loved people. He cared about his employees. We did little things like every employee got their birthday off with pay. Now that's a small thing, right? And it cost us a little bit of money, but everybody loved things like that. He was just incredible.
Eric says that's how you develop loyalty in the staff. Yes, sir, Eric. People go all out when you go all out for them.
Yeah. In fact, I'll tell you a story about my dad. There was a guy that worked for us and he got fired, and it was 2 weeks before Christmas. And he deserved to get fired. And my dad calls me. I lived next to this guy, and my dad calls me into his office one day, and he said, "Hey, this guy's name was Lynn," and he said, "You know what?
Not
Um,
Arlen.
no, but it was a guy, and he said, you know, I feel real bad about letting Lynn go, and especially with Christmas coming up." And he said, "Would you go and take this over to his house and give it to him?" Now, I had to go over like 2 days after he'd been fired. And, his little daughter answers the door and she's like, "Yes." And I said, "Is your father there?" "Okay, I'll go get my daddy. And of course, he comes to the door and he was not very happy to see me. And he says, "What do you want?" And I said, "Well, here, this is from my dad. And he wants you to have a Merry Christmas." And I remember my dad wrote a personal check to him for $5,000 for Christmas. Now, this was probably around, maybe 1995 or something like that. So that was
Wow.
a lot of money back then. And I can just imagine when this gentleman opened that check and thought, "Oh my gosh, I just got fired. And here Halloween just gave me Christmas money." So my dad was always thinking about people. He thought, "Oh man, I feel so bad. We had to let this guy go, but I'm still thinking about him and his kids during Christmas." And he was just incredible that way. Unbelievable man.
That is, now we just need that in the whole world. We have to get the whole world to read your books and do it.
Yeah, and so that's how the second book came about, was that I still had all these stories of this giving. Like when we were lined up in the funeral home when my dad, this is an incredible story. My dad had just died, and of course everybody was mourning, and these people came through, and this lady came through, and she had to be about 75 years old, and she says, "I was homeless." Now, keep in mind, again, these stories, we didn't know about them. She goes, "I was homeless and your dad bought me a house." And we were like, "What?" And so then maybe two or three other, people, 4 or 5 other people came through, and a lady came through with her daughter, and she said, "Oh, I couldn't afford to go to college and your dad paid for my college." And then another 5 or 10 people came through, and a young guy said, in our church, we have missionaries. You've probably seen them with white shirts and ties. And this kid said, "I wanted to go on a mission so bad, but I didn't have the money." And he said, "Your dad paid for my mission for 2 years." And of course, none of us kids we're like, "What the heck?" And so that was one thing that I loved about my parents. And my mom was the same way. When my dad died, I remember my mom, every Christmas, she would have these little envelopes, and she called me up and said, "Come to my house." And she probably had 10, 15 envelopes with cash in them, with some widows in Springville, Utah. And my mom said, "Go hand these out to these widows, but don't tell them who it's from." Well, I think they knew who it was from. It was me, and a lot of them knew me growing up and everything. But so my mom did the same thing. They just helped so many people.
And we can do that every day in our lives.
Yeah, and like I told you before, I think my dad prayed, and then he looked. So he prayed, and then he looked and said, "Okay, who can I help today?" For example, there was a guy that worked for us named Steve Curtis. And Steve Curtis said, "Your dad called me one day and said, 'Meet me at this address.'" And so he pulls up to this address. My dad's in his car, and he jumps in the car. And my dad said, "Steve, look at this guy's house. Do you see anything abnormal about his house?" And he's looking around. And he's like, "No, Hal, I don't see anything." And my dad's like, "Look harder, Steve, look harder." And he's like, I can't think of anything." And my dad said, "Look at his roof. His roof is about ready it's all rotted out and everything." And he says, "I want to buy this guy a new roof. I know he can't afford it, but don't tell him who it's from, and knock on his door and tell him somebody's going to replace his roof." And my dad drives off. And so this guy, Steve, he's like, "I was so afraid." He goes, "It's a total stranger's house." He goes, "I ring the doorbell. The guy comes to the door and he says, 'Yeah, what do you want?'" And he goes, "Well, I know that you don't know me and you might think this is weird, but there's a guy and he wants to give you a new roof. He doesn't want you to know who it is." And the guy's like, "Is this on candid camera or what?" And so then about 2 weeks later, he calls Steve up and he's like, "Hey, Steve, meet me at this other address." And so he meets him at the other address, and he says, "Do you see anything wrong here?" And he goes, "No." And he goes, "Look at this guy's car. He needs new tires." And so he said, "Knock on the door and tell the guy you don't know who it is, but he wants to give you new tires on your car." And so these are the things that, Hal Wing did. And he was just such a giver. It was incredible.
Wow. It's a good thing the company was doing so well to do this. So we all need to like do better in our companies and our personal whatever, so you can give more.
Well, here's the thing.
Formula.
Yeah, here's the thing. I told you the company was on thin ice a couple of times, and there were times that none of the employees knew this, but we knew it, that we couldn't pay. My mom and dad couldn't pay themselves, but they could pay, the employees. And there was times where we didn't have enough money to do like Christmas bonuses, and my dad and mom had to borrow the money. They were so good. I mean, they were just, my gosh, my dad was, he was such a risk taker too. He wasn't afraid of anything. And he was just, man, let's do this, and he made it. He said, he always used to say, we're going to make it. We've always made it, and we're going to make it. And he did, but he had this belief. I think that belief is so important, self-belief. And there's so many people that don't have that confidence, especially in the times we live in with the economy. And then we came out of COVID, and there were a lot of people with, anxieties and mental issues where they were, people were scared, and so I just love being around my mom and dad, because they really gave us self-confidence, and they were good examples to us. So it was wonderful.
And you can all develop that within yourselves by finding good people to hang around with, good mentors, and listen to your whispers. Like you said, your father listened to his intuition. How did he know to have that check for $10,000 in his pocket?
Yeah, with the name of Mel written out.
That's a whisper that came from God. I mean, that is just like divine. And I bet if we all open our ears and listen a little harder and pay more attention, we can do that every day in some little way.
Yeah, exactly. You read the Giant Success book, where I talk about Steve Curtis. That I remember I just talked about him a little while ago. Well, he didn't used to work for our company. In fact, he got in a really bad industrial accident, and I still do not know to this day how Hal Wing knew he was in the hospital. But he, and his wife tells the story that, Steve got in this really bad accident, and he blew half of his leg. His leg had to be amputated right below the knee, and he had shrapnel all in his body, and he was in shock, and they took him to the hospital. And here's the thing that's incredible is Vicky said they were, trying to stabilize him because he was in shock, and he was, it was really scary, and they didn't know what they were going to do with his leg at that time. But she says, we were only in there for 10 minutes. And all of a sudden she goes, I turn around and your dad's in the emergency room. And I don't know how he got in there. And she goes, Hal, how did you get in here? And he goes, that was easy. I just told him that Steve was my brother.
Mm-hmm.
And
we're all brothers and sisters.
Yeah. And so my dad finagles his way into the emergency room, there, and Steve's covered in soot, and his arms and hands and his face are black. She goes, your dad disappears for a little while and comes back, and he has a towel with soap, and she says he gently washes Steve's face and his arms and hands. And she said, I'll never forget, he leaned down to Steve's ear and he said, you really are my brother. And when you get out of here, you are going to work for me. And he left. And so Steve gets his leg amputated, and his wife wheels him into the house. He said, the very day, now think about this again, Hal Wing is in the right place again. She said, the very day I wheel Steve in his wheelchair, and he's got half of one leg, and he's depressed. And he told her, I can't work anymore. I'm going to be on disability the rest of my life. She said, the phone rings, and guess who's on the phone? Hal Wing. And she said, put Steve on, and he puts him on. He said, Steve, are you ready to come work for me? He said, Hal, I can't work anymore. I'm disabled now. I'm just going to have to be on disability. And Hal said, no, you're not. He goes, you can answer the phone, can't you? Well, yeah, I guess I can. He goes, good, you're working for me. Whenever you're ready, you got a job. And so he came to work for Little Giant. He worked there the rest of his career. And, Hal took chances on people, and people who maybe other people wouldn't have taken a chance on. Like, for example, there was a guy in his neighborhood he was a little bit mentally challenged. He was living with his mother. He was probably 30 years old, and he was probably getting, some kind of assistance from Social Security or someone. And my dad would see him in church, and his name was Mikey. And he had mental challenges. And my dad went to him one day in church and he said, Mikey, I want you to come work for me. And he goes, I can't work. And my dad said, no, you can work. And so Mike would go around cleaning the shop. He would, when they would unpack all the big pieces of metal, in the bundles, he would clean up all the garbage and he'd sweep the floors. And he worked there the rest of his career and retired from Little Giant. And you know what? That really built his self-esteem, even though there was only certain things he could do. But Hal saw something in this guy and he said, you're going to come work for me. So he really built people. That was the thing that was most impressive. He loved people and he built people and helped people. And you know what? His employees loved him and worked so hard for him. And then he was a huge success because of it.
And our buddy Ken Walsh just joined. Hey, and we showed your picture with you and Jill at one of the masterminds.
Ken, how are you?
Yeah.
Just
talking about the book. I think actually, didn't Ken Walsh help you with launching it?
Yeah, Ken Walsh helped me with marketing, and Jill also helped. Jill helped.
They're amazing. Jill Walsh and Ken Walsh talking about mentors who keep you going, keep you going, keep you going.
Yeah, and the funny thing is I can't remember which book it was, if it was 1 or 2. But I think it might have been number 2. But what's funny is when you go on Amazon and you have an author page and you can see how your book's doing in the categories, and you know this, Cynthia. But
I do.
I was blown away because I think it was The Giver, if I'm not mistaken, or it might have been number 1, but I think it was Giver. I was in a category with Ben Stein, who's sometimes a contributor on Fox News. And Ben's written a lot of books, right? He was the guy, the teacher on Bueller, right? Where you go, Bueller. Okay, so Ken and I, we would laugh about this, but I was in category with Ben Stein, and I was beating Ben Stein every week with The Giver. And it was hilarious because I was 1 or 2 and Ben Stein was always 3 or 4. And it was just funny, and I would sometimes drive down the road and I'd look in the mirror and I'd go, my book's beating Ben Stein's. I didn't believe it. It was crazy.
Yep. It's just about who you know and who knows you and what you're doing to help society and yourself. There you go.
But you know what? I would say writing these books, I learned a new talent. And the one thing about me, I wasn't the best student in the world. In fact, when I was in 10th grade, I like to tell this story as I teach, as I go and talk at schools to kids about my books and things. And I had a teacher in front of the whole class that told me I was stupid in English. And she said, you will never amount to anything. Now, I have tried to find this lady for years. I don't think she's alive anymore, but I wanted to take her to lunch and say, I did okay. I turned out okay. But I didn't believe that because my parents, the way I was raised. But I know there's kids who believe that, and other kids will tell them, or maybe their parents or teachers. But that kind of was a motivation to me. But I would have loved to have signed some books for her and said I did okay.
Yes, the original wingman, sweetheart of a guy. I got a picture someplace wearing my wingman T-shirt.
Yeah.
Yes. Not only that, you can help people every day, and your father even helped convicts, give them jobs back in the day, which was really unheard of, because you've got a story about someone in HR who didn't even want to interview him, right, Doug?
Yeah, and this person just recently passed away, and his wife, Bobby, I sent her some flowers when Jared passed away, and I sent her the book, and she said, man, this book is incredible. But so Jared, her husband, Jared, this was back in I'd say probably the early 80s, maybe late 70s, came out of prison and turned in a resume to Little Giant. And the HR guy called my dad in the office. He said, hey, you want to go through these? Hey, Hal, you want to go through these resumes with me? And my dad says, sure. And he says it was a stack of maybe, 30, 40 resumes we were hiring. And he took the one right off the top of the page and crinkled it into a ball, the HR manager, and he threw it in the garbage. And he said, we don't even need to talk to this guy. He's a loser. My dad says, I was intrigued. And my dad took the paper and straightened it all out. And he says, I don't see anywhere on this paper where it says this guy's a loser. He goes, he's an Eagle Scout. He served a 2-year mission for his church. I think we should bring this guy in for an interview. And he says, he just got out of prison. My dad says, I don't care. I want to meet with him. And so my dad meets with him. He's impressed with the guy and he decides to give him a job and hire him. And he said that guy was the hardest working guy that they had at that time in the factory building ladders. He would come early, he would leave late, he would outwork everybody. And within 2 or 3 years, this guy was a big guy. I mean, he was probably 6'4", 250 of just, he was a, muscle guy, big muscle guy. And his name was Jared. And so after about 3 or 4 years, my dad calls him in to his office and he has a big keychain with about 20 keys on it. And he hands him this keychain and he says, what's this for? And he goes, you're going to need this because you're now over all of manufacturing. And he said, this guy just wept. I mean, he just wept. And he said, don't you know what I've done? I've been in prison. And here my dad had never brought this up. And he said, yeah, I knew where you were. Of course I did. But he goes, that didn't matter. You're a very good man. You're such a good guy and you're such a good worker. And he says, this guy just picked my dad up and hugged him like a rag doll. And he just sobbed. And he worked for Little Giant until the day that he retired. And a wonderful, wonderful man.
Yeah, that is so fabulous. And thank you, Ken Walls, for sharing. That is such a good story. And guys, we can be doing that like right now. Like, don't judge anyone. You never know. It gives people second chances.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, and now going into this next book, there were some other stories that I had that were really just.
Oh yeah, tell.
Yeah. Cause so the first book is really good because it shows people how Hal built this business. And really he built the business by building people. And then the next book, The Giver, is about his philanthropy and his giving. Now this next book will be about integrity, which is really doing the right thing. And a lot of the times doing the right thing when no one's looking, right? Or when no one knows about it. So one of my favorite stories that I never heard about until I was interviewing a gentleman by the name of Curtis Bennett, who is just a great guy. And for years, he ran O.C. Tanner Jewelers in Salt Lake City, which is a very high-end jewelry store. And my dad loved bling. He did love nice watches and nice rings. And he
nice
loved
cars and nice motorcycles and nice horses. We'll have to come back to that.
And he loved to spoil my mom. I mean, we always said that Hal Wing had nice jewelry, but my mom she had the beautiful stuff. But
nice.
So Curtis Bennett, I'm interviewing him for the book. And he says, I'm going to tell you a story that will blow your mind about your dad. And so I said, okay, great. Tell me. And so he says, your dad's in his office one day working. The receptionist said, Hal, there's a couple here that wants to see you. And they don't have an appointment, but they really want to see you. Would you see him? And my dad was great about that. He said, yeah, bring him in. So they come into his office and they actually are carrying like a suitcase, a pretty good sized suitcase. And he's thinking, what is this? It's like a trunk, right? Or a suitcase. And they sit down with him and they say, Mr. Wing, we've heard a lot of nice things about you. We heard you're a fair guy, a good guy. And we are really down on our luck. We are in the process of losing everything we have, our business, our house. And the only thing we have left is we have this jewelry. We don't know anything about this jewelry. Would you take a look at it? And would you be willing to buy this jewelry from us? And so he says, yeah, let's take a look. Let's take a look at this jewelry. And so they put it up on his desk. And Curtis says, as they're going through this jewelry, he goes, your father knew what this jewelry was worth. And so he stops the couple and says, I really think that this jewelry is worth a lot more money than what you think. It's worth more than $100,000, because they had said, if you'll just give us a check for $100,000, we need this money and you can keep the jewelry and do whatever you want with it. And so.
Thanks, Dan.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dan. So what happened?
Yes.
Yeah. So what happened was my dad says, hey, let me make a phone call. And they're sitting in his office. He picks up his phone, calls Curtis. He says, Curtis, I've got this couple that's, down here in Springville, Utah. Would you be able to meet with them and look at their jewelry? It's beautiful jewelry. And I think it's worth a lot more than the 100,000. And so he said, yeah, Hal, I'm here, send them up. And so Salt Lake's about 45-minute drive. And so they come up and Curtis said, this jewelry was incredible. He said, it took me about 2 years to sell this jewelry. But he goes, I sold it all for 2.5 million.
There you go.
Now, he said,
Doing the right thing.
there's no doubt in my mind that Hal knew how much that jewelry was worth. And he didn't want to take advantage. He wouldn't take advantage of those people. And so here's the very best part of this story. After the 2 years is up, and they sell all their jewelry, and which saved them. I mean, they their lives were turned around. The couple comes back to Little Giant with a check for $100,000 made out to Hal Wing, and
Oh,
he wouldn't take it.
of course not.
So that's one of the stories that will be in this book about integrity. Was I know some people very close to me who would have justified it and said, "Oh, okay, I'm helping these people. I'm going to take the 100,000 and write them a check for 100,000 and keep this jewelry, knowing full well that My dad always used to say, here's one of his great quotes: if it's not a good deal for everyone around the table, then it's not a good deal. And so that was just a wonderful little quote. He had all these little sayings that were just really, really good. And as salesman, he would come into the sales offices and the sales meetings. And one of my favorite quotes was, he would say, you can tell the customer anything you want to, as long as it's
the truth.
And I mean, think about going in and buying cars and stuff. There's so many salesmen that are just liars, you know what I mean? And they just stretch the truth. But, if you always tell the truth, right?
In everything you do, in all of life. Yes.
Yeah. And you
Yes, Ken.
treat people the way that they should be treated.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? It's going to come back to you big time. And it always did to Hal. Yeah.
And when you said that, if it's not a good deal for everyone around the table, then it's not a good deal, right? Win-win. We all need to live in the win-win world. My mentor now, besides Ken Walls, is Glenn Morshower, and we were just talking about this on Tuesday. Win-win.
Yeah.
So both people have to win. You feel good, they feel good. The world moves in a better frequency, and that's how it works. Because a win-lose doesn't work, a lose-win doesn't work, and a lose-lose, you don't even want to play in that sandbox.
Yeah, and the one thing I learned too is really in sales, I know, Cynthia, you've been involved in sales too, is it's all about relationships. If you can develop relationships with people and they can like and trust you, and Jeffrey Gitomer talks about this too, the people will buy from people that they like and trust, and you have a superior product, you're going to do very well, if you treat people well, and then you have a good product. So it's really not that hard, but you have to learn these things and then do them.
And you have to pick the right product so that you have a passion for it. You have to love what you're doing.
Yeah. That's important. As I went out and traveled with other distributors, and, we would go on joint sales calls together. In other words, it may be a paint supply company, and they would take me out to painters and different things like that. And so we would ride together in the car, and they'd say, oh, I hate my job, and I'm thinking, well, why are you doing this? Because you hate your job, and your customers can probably tell you hate your job, and so you're not really giving it your full. And so you bring up a really good point, and that's what when I teach people at schools too, I always say, find something that you really care about and you're passionate about, and then do that, and do it better than anyone else. One of the things that made me a lot of money too was people would say, when my customers would say, when they called me and said, email me this price quote or send me the specifications on this fax.
Yeah.
I got back to them very quickly. They said, that was one thing about you, is that some salesmen took days to get quotes back and stuff. And they said, within 1 hour, you would have everything we needed. And so it made it easy to do business with them, right? And so, do the things that others aren't doing, and you will just be so successful.
And in the old days, I'd be at the door.
Yeah. Hi. See you, Ken.
Joining us, everybody. Thanks, Ken. We still got a couple minutes, and we got a few more stories we haven't chatted with. We have two places we want to go. We want to go into what inspired you to co-found Bohr Investment Group. That's a good question. So years ago, I was serving in, I don't know if you know what a bishop is in our church, but we have bishops in our church that are over congregations. And a good friend of mine, Robert Strain, was the bishop, and I was his first counselor. And he said to me, I was involved in Little Giant. He was doing property management and real estate. And he said to me one day, you and I are going to be partners someday, and we're going to have a really successful company. And I said, you're crazy. I'm building ladders. I'm selling ladders. There's no way. Well,
Robert was correct. After we sold Little Giant, I had the opportunity to start another company with him where we have a private, we have a property management company, and we own thousands of apartments. And he and his partner and my partner, so there's three of us that own a third of the company: Dallin, Henry, Robert Strain, and myself. And they are the most honest partners. I mean, but other than my dad. And we have this company, and they are just so great to work with. Now, I'm not really involved in the day-to-day operations anymore of the company, but they run the company and do a great job. But that's how I got involved in real estate. And real estate has been such a blessing to me because I went through a divorce a few years ago, and my ex-wife pretty much got everything I had in retirement. And so this has been a real blessing to my life, but it's been a really good business for us, and we've been so blessed and doing well.
Excellent. I'm glad to hear that. And
Yeah.
how about your motorcycle? Your motorcycle for your father. What do you do? Is that for the vets?
Yeah, for the Honoring Heroes Foundation, which is out of Utah. And what that does, that organization, is if we have anyone in law enforcement that is either killed in the line of duty or injured and they can't work anymore, I'm on the board of this Honoring Heroes Foundation. And so we come in and, like, for instance, a couple of years ago, one of the it was a city policeman that was killed, and he did not even have enough money to buy his burial plot. And so Honoring Heroes steps in, and we paid for that and his funeral and some other things. And sometimes we'll send his widow, and the kids maybe to Disneyland and things like that, and help set them up with scholarships for college. But this was something my dad was involved in, and I've jumped into this. It's just wonderful. And so every year, once a year, we do this. It's the biggest fundraiser for Honoring Heroes in Utah. We do a Howling Memorial Ride, and
Yes.
we go out and do, we get, hundreds of guys on their Harleys, and some guys are driving their cars, and we raise a bunch of money for these law enforcement, first responders, people that are great. I mean, without the men and women of law enforcement, the military, and first responders, they keep us safe. Yeah. And so my dad was, this was near and dear to him. And so I'm involved in that as well.
And wasn't he driving some important police officer on his motorcycle, like really, really, really fast? Who was that?
That was my uncle that he was fast with on his bike. But there's a speeding ticket in my my car room where my dad got a ticket for 185 in a 55 in one of his cars, and I framed it. He had it, and he'd show it to people, and I framed that ticket. But thank goodness my dad was very supportive to the police, because that day they could have taken him to jail and taken his car away. But he really loved the men and women of law enforcement, and he had a little bit of a lead foot, and he loved cars. He met Jay Leno and in California one time, and they had a lot of the similar cars, and he said he thought Jay Leno was a really, really nice guy, a humble guy, for how successful he was. And my dad was a lot like that. My dad never hung around with millionaires and billionaires. Some of his best friends worked for him. He was just an average guy. And so I think that's what a lot of people liked about Hal. And I'll tell you something else about my dad is one of his best friends. When I interviewed for the book, Mark Washburn, he said, I never, in the 50 years I knew your dad, I never heard him swear. I never heard him say a bad word. And I thought, my goodness, that's something right there, because, a lot of people today have really colorful language, but he said, I never heard your dad use any bad language or swear words. And so he was just a great man.
And you follow in his footsteps with that and with his cars. What's going on with your cars these days?
Well, my father had about 55 cars when he was alive, but there's no way. I think I counted them the other day, and I think I have 11 cars and trucks, and those keep you pretty busy, just keeping them washed and clean and those types of things. But, I've been so involved in charitable stuff and writing these books that, I just really haven't had in Utah, I did a lot of car shows. I loved doing those car shows, and kids would come and they'd be like, can we sit in your car? But I just haven't had a lot of time to do that anymore. But it's not the most. There are a few times a year when I have these church groups come in and they want to tour the car building. And I say, I will only do it on one condition, and that is that you let me talk to these kids for 10 minutes. And the first thing I say to these 12 to 16-year-old kids that come in, and I say, look around here, and everything that you see in this building doesn't mean a thing. People are more important than things, and these things someday somebody else will have them and like them, or they'll be in the junkyard long after I'm gone. And so, I tell people, these young boys and men, young men, I say the most important thing you can do is be a good husband and father when you grow up, and you can be a good, honest member of society and work hard and take care of your family. That's more important than having nice cars and things like that. So I always enjoy doing those things, and just letting them know, hey, these things don't matter. I mean, yeah, it's okay to have nice things, but they're not the most important things in life.
I'm so glad you're saying that. That's really, really very good. I'm very proud of you, Doug Wing. Eric says that he does first Thursday tomorrow prayers for the law enforcement and military. Thank you, Eric. Thank you. Thank you.
I met Eric in Houston when I went down there, and I think he was on either on Jeffrey's program or Ken's, but Eric's a good man. I think he does a little bit of preaching on the side, and he's a hardworking guy and just a very, very nice guy. I've enjoyed getting to know him.
And you can catch him every morning for a little verse. He
Yeah.
is amazing, and we're going to have him on the show soon also. But now tell us about your new bride. Congratulations, Heidi, if you're listening. Haven't met you in person yet. Woohoo!
I think he's making dinner or something, but
Nice.
yeah. So there was a time so I went through a very hard divorce in 2019. I was married to someone who was very abusive, verbally and mentally and verbally, and that was hard. And then I got divorced, and there was a time I was like, I don't know if I want to do this again. And then I had a friend in Salt Lake. Her name's April Barton, and she said, hey, I know someone in the Philippines, and April served a mission for our church in the Philippines, and she said Heidi also served a mission, and she was a wonderful missionary, and I think you guys would really hit it off well. And so she introduced us, and everything was locked down, but the Philippines was really locked down. I mean, you could not even go to the Philippines. Everybody was wearing masks. Everywhere you went, it was masks. And so finally the Philippines opened, and I was able to meet her for the first time. And one of my business partners that I mentioned before, Robert, he took his daughter, and he goes, I'm going with you because I don't want you to make a mistake. And he said, you can't do this. You can't.
Good friend.
Yeah. And so Robert goes, and I love this story because Robert says, I want to talk to her alone and get to know her first. So the first day we go there, Heidi comes over, and Robert just says, let me go talk to Heidi for a minute. And they come back like half an hour, 45 minutes later. And then he just leaves. He says, oh, me and my daughter, we're going to go whale watching and do all these other things. I'll talk to you later. And so off he goes, and Heidi and I get to know each other. We have dinner. We're walking on the beach and everything. And then she leaves. And then really late at night, Robert texts me. We're staying at this really nice resort. He says, I've got to talk to you tonight. This is really important. There's something I got to tell you about Heidi. And I thought, oh no, there's like a red flag, right? I was like panicking. So he comes, 5 minutes later, he comes into my room, and he's like, hey, there's something I got to tell you about Heidi. And I'm thinking, what is it? Is she crazy or what? I'm just dying. And he looks right at me in all seriousness, and he goes, she may be too good for you. Don't mess this up. And then he leaves.
Ooh.
And everything that he said about her is true. She's just a sweetheart. She's such a nice person and hardworking. She worked 6 days a week and got put herself through college, and she's just a sweet lady. But anyway, he said, don't blow this. She's a really good lady.
So don't blow this, Doug Wing. We're watching you.
Working on
it. Wow. Well, when's your new book coming out?
We were going to do Christmas, and I think Carol from Mark Victor Hansen said, well, that's going to be kind of going to be tight.
So yeah.
I think the plan is that it will be just like The Giver was released on March 5th, which is my father's birthday. So we will release this new one on March 5th, 2025. And we'll do the audio book with the same person that did The Giver, because I thought he did a good job, and I want to kind of keep, the same the continuity there. But I'm really excited about this. We have 4 or 5 possible titles. Mark's got some ideas. Jeffrey Gittimer's got some ideas. Ken and Jill Walls have given me a couple of ideas. So we actually are meeting tomorrow. I've already written out most of the chapters, and then I'm meeting with them tomorrow. Carol McManus from the publishing company. And we, the thing is it's amazing how these books come together. For me, I like to do Zoom meetings with the publisher, and then we record them, and then I tell the stories, and then they put it into words for me, right? And then they let me see, they put the words together, and then I can go ahead and delete stuff or edit stuff. But for me, that's how I write books, is I tell the stories, and everybody does it different. And then they help me with, the right grammar and all that. That was never one of my strengths, English, but it works out really well. And I think I got that ability from my father. He was a very good speaker, and he could tell, he had some great stories. And so that's how I write a book is I tell the stories, and then I help edit and write. So I don't know how you do it, but that's kind of how I do it.
So you can tell that English teacher, wherever she is in the universe, you have 3 books. How many do you have?
Yeah, Miss McPolin was her name.
Ladies and gentlemen, watch your words. Watch your words.
Especially for kids,
affect people for life, really.
Yeah.
That old saying, one mouth, two eyes, 2 ears.
Yeah, that's the other thing about sales, as you know, Cynthia, is listen more than you speak. And if you listen to the customer and really see what they need, and then you provide the things that they need, you will be a success in sales. Most salesmen, they just want to listen to respond, right? But don't listen to validate, and then provide what they need, and you will be a success.
And follow through. Let them know what's happening.
Exactly. Yeah.
All the way through. Like, you had a lot of times when you didn't have product, and you called up and said it's going to be 4 to 6 weeks, but you're going to get your product. And it's going to be perfect, and it's going to be exactly. We're not rushing it through. We're doing the right thing by you.
Yeah, and I think one of the things today, how people are like just into texting, and they sending emails and texts. I still believe that if you can be a good communicator and have a relationship with your customers, and actually talk to them and develop a relationship. I mean, so many people, I'll send you a text, even kids texting each other, and they don't really know how to communicate and pick up a phone. I think that is a long lost art. And if people will develop those skills, they will be very successful.
And not only that, guys, you can't assume that the people are getting your message.
Exactly.
So double check what form are they using.
Yeah, you can send someone a text, and it can be taken in several different ways, right? Depending on who gets it. Mm-hmm. And so I still think that there's a lost art of being able to communicate and talk to people face to face, and we're losing that with everybody texting. And of course I send texts, I mean, like anybody else, but I still I call my friends all the time when I'm out walking, and I just like to hear people's voices and be interested in what they're doing. And if you'll take an interest in customers as well, what their interests are, and you learn about them, it's another thing that really helps, to be successful.
And you're looking good. You're doing a lot of walking and talking.
Trying, yeah. I'm usually walking every day in the morning, an hour, and then before I go to bed, I walk for an hour. So
that's about 10,000 steps or more a day.
Yeah. And so anyway, it's
That's
like
good for your soul, guys. You got a problem. You got that. Sometimes you get that.
Yeah.
Take a walk.
You have to.
In nature.
Here's the thing. You really have to take care of your bodies too, as well. And if you don't have energy to go out and do things because you're overeating, or you're not exercising, or you're not getting enough sleep. That was one thing that really hurt my dad, is that he was so hyper and had so many good ideas. He only slept 2 or 3 hours a night. And that I do believe that really led to him having a shorter lifespan. But he was always just thinking and going. And he would call at 1 a.m. and wake me up, and hey, I've got an idea. We could do this at work. And I said, we talk about this tomorrow? You woke me up. And she's like, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot you sleep. And so, he was just always thinking and trying to think of new things that he could do. But, take care of yourself, because, it will catch up with you when you get older. And so my advice is eat right as good as you can, sleep well, and take care of your body, because you get one body, and life goes really fast.
And Eric wrote a good one here. Yes, we love Jeffrey Gittimore too. We had Little Red Book of Selling. Eric wrote, the tone of voice, cadence of words can't be read through texts and emails. There's so much miscommunication just about how it's read it can be loving and they can take it.
Yeah.
Yes, you did put a lot of life in those years. However, you could put in more life and have a little bit of joy and spend a little more time doing things that are good for your soul.
Exactly. Yeah. So, we're doing good here. My wife and I'd like to serve a couple of church missions. We're working on her citizenship right now. She's, getting close to getting her, not her permanent citizenship, but, like her visa I think it'll go through the 2029, and then we'll work on her citizenship. But once we get her more stabilized with her citizenship status, then we're going to probably go and do a couple of church missions, and those are always fun to help and serve other people.
And it's excellent that you're doing the right thing with your wife. Looks like you've been the stand-up man the whole way and following all the procedures of the United States government and the Philippines, and good job.
Yeah, we're
a good example.
Sometimes it's frustrating to see on TV, people crossing the border illegally, and it takes a while when you're doing it the right way, but I think we've been blessed, and it's gone quicker than what I thought, it would. But so you just you don't give up. You just keep on keeping on. Yeah.
Every day in every way, take one step on that ladder, one step at a time, and keep on going, because you eventually get to the top.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, Doug Wing, it has been a pleasure having you on the show, and congratulations to you and your beautiful wife, Heidi. And I can't wait to read your third book.
Thank you very much for your support and for this opportunity to talk a little bit about, one of probably the greatest influence in my life was my father, Hal Wing, and to be able to work with him, for all those years and watch him and learn and listen to him. And my mother was good too. My mom didn't get a lot of attention. She didn't really want it, but to be able to work with a guy like Hal Wing, to be married to him and let him do what he needed to do with 7 kids and no driver's license. And he was gone over half of the year. He was gone over 300 days a year, so more than that. So for my mother, really, my dad could not have done what he did without my mom. And so kudos to my mother, who doesn't get a lot of credit, but she was strong and good.
Behind many good men is a good, strong woman. And now behind many strong women are a very good man. So it works both ways.
Yes.
Loving this world, loving your life, make good choices, do the right thing, and look for Doug Wing's new book. We look forward to it, Doug. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good to see you, Cynthia.
Mm.
Take care.